Welcome to the Global Refugee Forum side event on digital protection, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. Ladies and gentlemen, first, some practical points. This event is being live streamed on Zoom. Interpretation is available in Arabic, English, and French. Use the handsets on your chairs. And please, as you leave at the end, you make sure that you leave the headsets, please, on the chairs. This event is one of the first at the UN conference to focus on specifically on forced displacement, stateless, and humanitarian challenge related to this topic. A new issue on the Global Refugee Forum. Today we will hear from partners including the refugee experts, government, private sector, United Nations, international organizations, and NGOs about the prevention of harmful information online in the humanitarian context. I will introduce the panelists in turn to make their remarks. We will then open the floor for discussion. Dear panelists, forgive me if I mispronounce your name or it doesn't mean any intentional thing. That's the first disclaimer I'm making. I will now start by introducing our first panelist, Ms. Gela Tigres, UNHCR Assistant High Commissioner for Protection. Gilena, what are the risks of misinformation, disinformation, hate speech? Yeah, just close to me. I was looking for you. Misinformation, hate speech to refugee communities in the humanitarian situation and crisis, where often UNHCR works.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Welcome everybody to this. It is a very exciting meeting and one that's enormously important in this age and generation. I'd like to begin, though, if I may, by saying we're coming to the end of the 3 days of the GRF, and it's marvelous to hear the buzz is still there, the noise is still there, people are still here, and you've all been so deeply engaged in the purposes of this forum, which are, of course, to share globally responsibility for refugees, but to do it on a whole of society basis. And I think that this panel reflects that whole of society. So I will try to speak as briefly as I can to try to answer your question. But can I begin by saying how encouraged we are at the UN Refugee Agency by the multi-stakeholder pledge championed by Google, which was announced this morning in plenary. Thank you very much. We've got 20 strong pledges from a range of stakeholders, a network of NGOs, partner organizations, and of course from my fellow panelists from Norway, from Google, as I've mentioned, the Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, wonderful to see you here, and the ICRC. The pledges are new, they're innovative, they're concrete, and they're potentially transformative, and we hope that when implemented, they will act as a springboard. Well, the issue has become one of great urgency. Across the world, hate speech, misinformation, disinformation on digital platforms are causing real harm to many globally, but for our purposes, to refugees, to people who are stateless, and people who are displaced within their own country. This is not just a tech, data, or communications issue. It's a protection issue, and I think that really goes to, I hope, answering something of your question. This is important because it affects people. When social media emerged a generation ago, digital platforms were embraced, of course, by all of us as exciting new ways to connect, to innovate, and to learn. But optimism over that potential dampened as a surge of vicious hate speech mis and disinformation came from the margins of digital space into the mainstream. This growth of hateful content on digital platforms has worsened by the rise of easily shareable misinformation. It now risks being turbocharged by generative AI. Hate speech, of course, is not new. It's historically been linked to the commission of mass atrocities, of course, from the Holocaust, Cambodia in the 1970s, Rwanda in 1994, Srebrenica in 1995, and Myanmar in 2012 to 17. Hate speech can be a root cause of forced displacement. As hate speech has moved online, where individual posts can rapidly reach mass audiences, its impact as a cause of forced displacement requires monitoring in a proportionate and appropriate way. Threats and acts of violence resulting from extremism, where these are motivated by racism and xenophobia, risk compromising the protections which are so important to the work we do at UNHCR for asylum seekers and all people displaced. Despite having fled violence themselves, rather than being perpetrators of such acts, refugees are often used as the scapegoats by politicians and the media. So it is an issue of profound concern to all of the United Nations and, of course, to the Refugee Agency, and we call for the protection of those fleeing violence, including threats resulting from violent extremism and hate speech spread online. The damaging effects of harmful information, as I've said, are very real. And this year, in order to find a little bit more about what we mean by this, we conducted 2 global surveys to understand the impact of hate speech and mis and disinformation on refugees. And the survey of refugees attending the GRF was an initiative of our working group of the GRF refugee experts on the topic, which of course helps to explain why including meaningfully refugees in the work that we do is proving to be very effective. And of course my fellow panelists Ali and Zara of course have assisted. But the findings are stark. 85% of those refugees who responded to the survey have said that they have witnessed hate speech or disinformation that they believe is deliberately targeted against people who've been forcibly displaced. But I found the figure extraordinary, that 72% of refugee respondents have personally been targeted with hate speech or disinformation. We also surveyed our own colleagues, 20,000 colleagues working in 530 operations globally with the unprecedented rise of emergencies and humanitarian crises. We asked them what was the impact on them, and we found that majority of our own staff who were surveyed, they themselves had witnessed hate speech, disinformation or misinformation that they believe impacted UNHCR's mandate over the past year. The good news is that 1/3 of the respondents say that refugee-led organizations or community-led organizations are actively working to combat hate speech and disinformation. Can I say in conclusion that what we now understand is crucial to responding to this rise of hate speech is further international cooperation and our multi-stakeholder partnerships, which after all is what this Global Compact is all about. But with great power comes great responsibility. The tech companies, we believe, need to do more and better for ethical reasons as well as for their business model. So can I conclude by saying what is our goal, what is our objective? And that is that displaced and stateless communities can exercise their human rights online and are protected from digital risk. We want them to have access to trusted channels, to avoid harm, and to have agency in decision-making of matters that relate to them. So thank you very much, and I hope that's not too long an explanation of an answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Agency and the response of the RLO you say is a great one. We move to the thank you for your remarks. We will now move to our second panelist, Master Ali Malumba, one of the refugee experts for the Global Refugee Forum. Alaya is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who lives in the United States. Alaya, can you share example of harmful consequences of mis and disinformation, hate speech on digital platforms, and your thoughts on the solution? What are your thoughts?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Dear Ms. Alice Nderu, Under Secretary General and UN Special Advisor on Prevention and Genocide. Dear Ms. Gillian, UNHCR Assistant High Commission for Protection. Ms. Njetili, State Secretary of Norway, Minister of Labor and Social Inclusion. Ms. Santiago, Managing Director of Global Partnership of Google. Dear participants and all colleagues, it is my honor today to share with you my thought on the role of social media on conflict in Africa. War and army conflict in several countries in Africa, such as Sudan, South Sudan, Congo, Kinshasa, Mali, and other countries, are the resultant of thousands of displaced and millions of refugees around the world. As the root of those conflicts are discrimination, xenophobia, hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, and intolerance. With the emergence of social media on the African continent, it is observed that hate speech and false information, misinformation, have increased in the eyes of African government and authority. As a reminder, in the past 2 decades, the media have played an important role in conflict in Africa. We have the example here of Radio Rwanda during the genocide in Rwanda, and a lot of media during election in Africa. I will cite Kenya during the election in 2007 between Raila Odinga and Moi Kibaki. Even on my country right now, we are on election period in other countries in Africa, such Cote d'Ivoire. Media still play a key role on election in Africa. Since then, we have seen that all the extremists and the other journalists have took place on social media, where they can now spread their message, tweet message, hate information and disinformation without worrying. The entire communities are now being targeted. Among them, we have refugees, we have asylum people and other minority people. We have the message, those extremists call for violence, murder, and launch even sometime live on social media without any worrying. New technology that should be a tool for exchange and connection between community around the world have become a tool of vulgarization of false information, disinformation, and misinformation of population. And sometimes those social media have been even supported by other governments around the world. In view of those situations, it is important to regulate the social media sector by providing them with a legislative framework. It's the lack of legislative framework on social media in Africa. It is a factor that contributes to the conflict and hate speech in Africa. To conclude, I suggest, first, to giant tech, Google, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, to have more representation on African continent, and to take also in account African diversity on language, as you have been doing with Google Translate and other things. To African government and African unions and other regional institutions, to work on legislative and framework that will regulate social media in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alia. Now it is a pleasure to introduce Master Sheet Il, the Secretary of the Norwegian Ministry of Labour, Social Inclusion.
Thank you so much, and distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here with you today. Digitalization offers many opportunities to reach a large number of people with humanitarian aid and crucial information. But it also presents significant protection challenges that need to be addressed. The growth of social media and digital channels, which has had a positive impact in many ways, has also led to a rapid and increased spread of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech. Unfortunately, some of these false narratives are becoming more commonplace and accepted. The narratives are polluting social media feeds and degrading information integrity. State and non-state actors motivated by political, ideological, commercial, or other interests are increasingly able to spread misinformation and disinformation using digital tools and artificial intelligence. Disinformation and propaganda campaigns may undermine public trust in the democratic process and institutions. The campaigns often have a polarizing effect and fuel intolerance and hatred between groups. It can fuel conflict and make peace and reconciliation even harder to achieve. Digital misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech spread online can prevent people from getting access to humanitarian aid. Furthermore, it can inflict both psychological and physical harm. This development has had a negative impact on refugees and other forcibly displaced people. They are often targets of these narratives. It can fuel tensions between refugees and host communities. We need to address this issue as a part of our work to find sustainable solutions for refugees and those forcibly displaced and their host communities. Misinformation and disinformation about certain humanitarian actors can also inhibit or cause damage to humanitarian operations. This may, in turn, prevent the actors from reaching those affected by crisis or conflict. We have seen coordinated campaigns of mis- or disinformation against humanitarian organizations in recent conflicts, including Ukraine. Donor countries must do two things at the same time. We must capitalize on the opportunity digitalization offers, but we also have to take the challenges associated with digitalization seriously and ease these risks. On the one hand, we should express clear expectations for humanitarian organizations to address both the challenges and opportunities digitalization brings. But we must also understand that this work requires resources and allow the organizations to add digital protection activities to their budgets. Norway has, through our Humanitarian Innovation Program, granted approximately $5.7 billion to innovation projects that address challenges and opportunities related to digital protection. We are very pleased to announce that one of the projects supported in 2023 is led by UNHCR. The project is addressing the need for strengthening information integrity in humanitarian settings. The projects will allow UNHCR to partner with the private sector and develop proactive strategies to combat misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech targeting or affecting forcibly displaced and stateless people. The aim is to target narratives which are widely circulated and amplified on social media and digital platforms. The project seeks to design a toolkit successfully neutralize or pre-bunk harmful narratives before they impact or threaten displaced people. This is important work. It is also a pleasure for me to highlight another digital protection project supported by the program UNICEF's Digital Equality, Virtual Safe Space for Women and Girls. Through this project, UNICEF is addressing violence and discrimination faced by women and girls. We know that women and girls are often targeted differently from men, often more severely targeted by online hate speech. So understanding the gendered aspect of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech is crucial. Turning to Norway, we are also concerned about the situation of hate speech and polarizing content on digital platforms. Currently, the Norwegian government has taken initiative for several measures to de-escalate conflict and polarization and to create dialogue. My government will increase the efforts against online hate speech. One key strategy in Norway is working with the school sector in order to make media literacy an important part of the curriculum. Awareness, knowledge, and a human-centered approach in the digital world are the key elements in our collective efforts to mitigate hate and misinformation. So Norway commits to supporting the prevention of harmful impact of hate speech, misinformation, and disinformation in digital space, targeting refugees through two innovative projects receiving support from the Norwegian Humanitarian Innovation Program, administered by Innovation Norway, which is UNHCR's project strengthening information integrity in humanitarian settings, and as I talked about, UNICEF's Digital Equality, virtual safe space for women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you for those thoughtful remarks, State Secretary. Next, I would like to introduce Ms. Sahara Walter Mohammed, one of the refugee experts on the Global Refugee Forum. Sahara comes from Mali, now lives in a refugee camp in Mauritania. Sahara will make her remarks in Arabic. Please put on your headsets. Please turn to Channel 1 for English and Channel 2 for France interpretation.
شكرا عبد الله. شكرا لجميع الحاضرين. مرحبا، والقي تحياتي للسيدات والسادة الحاضرين. شكرا لمنح هذه المداخلة المتواضعة بصفتي مندوب للاجئين. معذرة، سأبدأ بشكر المفوضية السامية لشؤون اللاجئين على الجهود التي بذلتها من أجل حقوق اللاجئين عامة في العالم، كما أشكرها على المساهمة في إنجاح هذا المنتدى العظيم. ومن هذا المنبر أشكر جميع الجهات التي شاركت في تنظيم المنتدى العالمي للاجئين. إنه من الرائع حقا أن يكون هناك منتدى يضم كمية من الخبراء من اللاجئين، هذا شيء رائع. بالنسبة لتجربتي مع المعلومات الخاطئة سيئة جدا، حيث كانت اقتحام للشرطة منزل أهلي. أتذكر في عام 2021 بالتحديد في شهر 6 قامت الشرطة باقتحام منزل أهلي وتفتيشه، وعندما حاولت معارضة التفتيش قاموا باعتقالي. ليلة كاملة في السجن بسبب معلومات خاطئة. واتضح أنه أحد أخبر الشرطة بأن عائلتي تقوم بإخفاء الأسلحة في منزلها. نعم بالفعل هذا حدث. وما أريد قوله هو أن المعلومات الخاطئة وخطب الكراهية هذه أشياء تعودنا عليها عندما أصبحنا لاجئين. أعني عندما تصبح لاجئ في بلد ما أو تعيش في دولة ليست بدولتك، تأكد أن هذا الموقف الذي حدث مع عائلتي سوف يحدث معك أيضا. الأسوأ أننا لا يمكننا تحمل ظاهرة خطب الكراهية على الإنترنت، لأنها يتم تداولها يوميا خاصة على فئات معينة مثل اللاجئين. ما أريد توضيحه هو أن اللاجئين هم أكثر فئة متضررة بسبب المعلومات الخاطئة. أمثلة في العواقب التي تتعرض للاجئين بسبب المعلومات الخاطئة: قد يسبب خطاب الكراهية تجاه اللاجئين بإعاقة التبرعات لهم، كما يهدد أمنهم في الدولة المضيفة. قد تكون المعلومات الخاطئة تجاه اللاجئين سبباً فاعلاً في العودة القسرية، وتتمثل المعلومات الخاطئة دوراً في إعاقة الخدمات الاجتماعية والاقتصادية في الدولة المضيفة للاجئين، حيث تسبب منع الخدمات العامة مثل خدمات الصحة والتعليم، حيث دائما يكون هناك تعصب للمجتمع المضيف تجاه اللاجئ بسبب معلومات خاطئة وخطاب الكراهية. وبالنسبة لحالة الاستجابة على مستوى المجتمعات، خطب الكراهية يمكن أن يضر بالمجتمعات والسلام والتنمية، لأنها تمهد الطريق للصراع والتوتر وانتهاكات لحقوق الإنسان، بما في ذلك الجرائم الوحشية. وبالتالي فإن معالجة خطاب الكراهية والتصدي له ضرورة. كما أن هناك ممارسات قد تكون فاعل في الصد لهذه الظاهرة. لدي أمثلة. إن مشاركة اللاجئين في أنشطة التعايش السلمي أحد الأساسيات في هذه الممارسات، كما أن تمكين اللاجئين في قيادة حقوقهم سوف تكون فاعل قوي في هذا المسار. دعوة المنظمات الغير الحكومية التي تعمل على حماية اللاجئين والمهاجرين والأشخاص النازحين للمشاركة في تجارب الأنشطة لبناء مرونة الشباب خاصة اللاجئين تجاه المحتوى الضار عبر الإنترنت ووسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، وتنظيم لجنة من اللاجئين والمضيفين المحليين في كل مخيم للاجئين أو النازحين تحارب هذه الظاهرة من خلال تكوين مباشر لشباب على استخدام الجيد لوسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. ولأننا نعيش العالم الحقيقي في عالم افتراضي يؤمن بالشكل والخبرة وينبهر بكل شيء يراه جميل، هنا يجب علينا أن نصنع للاجئ صورة جميلة ومبهرة تجعل العالم يرى أن اللاجئ ليس إنسان مغلوب، وإنما هو شخص جميل ولديه طموحات ويمكن أن يكون ذو فائدة على المجتمع، خاصة المجتمع المضيف. وبهذه الأفكار يمكننا أن نكسب العواطف من المجتمع المضيف. هذه بعض المقترحات التي قد تساعد في الصد وتخفيف من هذه الظاهرة المتطورة، ألا وهي خطاب الكراهية على وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. وفي آخر كلامي كما تعودت القول، يجب على العالم أن ينظر إلى اللاجئين وعديمي الجنسية بشكل مختلف، لأنهم يجلبون معهم المهارات القيمة. وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And now it is a pleasure to introduce Master Santiago da More, the Managing Director of the Global Partnership for Google. Welcome. Santiago, can you explain what Google is doing to reduce the risk of disinformation and hate speech on your platforms?
Thank you for the opportunity. Before I address that, if we could play a short video, that would be really appreciated.
Video to be played.
As a refugee, you have no one. What do you do?
When you come from your war zone and you reach in a country where there is no bullet, of course you feel that you are in heaven. I think that I'm the only person in the world. Then I have found my workmate who have the same passion as mine.
Great art comes from the limitations of things.
It's infectious to spread love.
I've never given up. I also trying it other people to not give up.
When we lost our home, music was our therapy.
We are all struggling to meet the same need. Before you think of going far, start from where you are. Despite being refugees, we have something in common. We are all human beings. That's my message.
So, an important way to counter mis and disinformation and hate speech is to create empathy, to create a connection by empowering refugees to be part of their narrative creation. And this partnership with UNHCR in the We Were Here campaign on YouTube is a perfect example of that. And there are many different ways where we can work together to address this important topic. For us, understanding, mitigating, and preventing harmful information online is absolutely critical to advance the objectives of the Global Compact on Refugees. And we're very happy to be talking about this today and having this opportunity. Access to reliable and trustworthy information has always been top of mind for us. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful for everyone. And we know that the internet is a boon to society, contributing to education, healthcare, economic development, by enabling people to access information at an unprecedented scale. That's true in all times, but it's particularly vital in times of crisis. Access to reliable information can be indeed life-saving. But like other communication channels, the open internet is also vulnerable to risks, such as misleading information and hate speech. And when our services are used to propagate misleading or harmful content, our mission is undermined. How companies like Google address these concerns has an impact on society and on the trust users place in our services. And we take that responsibility very seriously. So, to counter these risks, Google invests heavily in making reliable information more accessible. We have several strategies, and those include surfacing trustworthy information. On products like Google Search, we design our ranking systems to surface relevant information from the most reliable sources available. In situations that require particular care, we partner with authoritative organizations to highlight reliable information. For example, we display alerts on Google Search where we surface emergency resources from authoritative organizations like UNHCR and ICRC. Second, we have a policy enforcement strategy. And by that, I mean that we have clear policies on hate speech and misinformation. And through algorithmic systems and moderators, we work to identify violating content and take action like blocking, removing, or restricting that content. Third, we also focus on user education and empowerment. On Google Search, for example, we help people contextualize the information they see online through information literacy features like fact-checking Explorer. But we should be aware that tackling misinformation is an ongoing challenge and that we continue to invest in it. We have about 8.5 billion daily searches on Google Search alone. And about 1 billion of those searches every day are new. That's 15% of the total. So to keep up the pace, we need to focus on partnerships. So we focus on partnerships with NGOs, academics, governments, and other relevant experts to stay ahead of emerging trends. But furthermore, AI was mentioned, and we also build responsibly from the start our products. We believe that AI has tremendous potential to advance human rights.
Thank you. Access to information can be life-saving. That's a great one. Thank you. Next, I turn on to Mrs. Julia Risk, who works as the Digital Risk Advisor for ICRC, the International Committee of Red Cross. Julia, what is the ICRC seeing in terms of harms caused by misinformation, disinformation, hate speech? And what is your take? What is your practical response, especially through the conflict lenses?
Thank you, Abdullahi. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, if I may actually take us back to where we started with Madam Triggs when she actually said something very important, and that will be the anchor of the answer to your question, Abdullahi, and that is that when we're speaking of harmful information and the spread that we see of harmful information online today at the scale, the speed, and the reach of it, we're talking about an issue of protection of civilians. So I'd like to take us back to that and keep that in mind as we continue the discussion today. So the spread of harmful information, specifically in times of conflict and other humanitarian settings, is actually an issue that is deeply concerning for us at the ICRC. We've seen that digital front lines of conflict have further spread to information ecosystems, jeopardizing people's ability to protect themselves. And also, it's eroding trust in the role and the mandates of humanitarian organizations. But our concern is not only about digital technology, it's also about the lack of access to meaningful and reliable and safe connectivity for people when they need it the most to make decisions, to make choices, and potentially becoming an issue of life and death. Our view is that actually, in relation also today to the subject of today's plenary, that one of the most visible forms of conflict is forced displacement. And it's one of the most visible forms of suffering, actually. During these times, people can be particularly vulnerable. Information is really important for them to make decisions on where to go, when to go, do they stay, do they leave, where do they seek access to essential services, to protection services, and at times, services that may be important for their survival. The spread of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech through digital means not only fuels conflict, but it also stresses people's access to these essential services. In recent years, we've seen that digital platforms have been used to incite violence against civilians, medical facilities, and humanitarian responders, including first responders, in times of conflict. We've seen that the spread of hateful speech and dehumanizing narrative, and I want to stress a bit on that, against people in need of humanitarian protection, such as refugees, is really at a scale and a speed that I would say was not seen a decade ago. We've also seen that disinformation spreading amongst civilians is jeopardizing their safety and their access to the services that they need the most, but including also access to safe passage, evacuation routes, and so on. And often we've seen that the spread of disinformation can be designed to undermine the work of medical personnel and humanitarian workers and humanitarian organizations at large. We also see that narratives that are fueling polarization and encouraging violence or discrimination against minorities, refugees, and even host communities is spreading. And that is continuously threatening the prospects for humanitarian negotiations on very important subjects, such as safe passages, evacuations, but also threatening discussions and negotiations around peace and reconciliation, creating a downward spiral that feeds the protraction of conflict and the protraction of violence. Today, there's so much distorted and inaccurate information, whether it is spread intentionally or not. We're worried that people's ability to access life-saving information is compromised, their situational awareness is compromised at a time when they need it the most again, to make decisions and potentially life-saving decisions and access services, potentially life-saving services. The digital information space may fuel conflict to the detriment of civilians, their safety, their dignity, their autonomy, their agency. And it causes physical, psychological, but also societal harms that are long-lasting beyond the duration of the information spread itself, beyond the time that we're actually consuming or perceiving that information. Harmful information does not stop at borders. The threat to civilians, including refugees, is serious, and addressing it is complex. And Abdullahi, here I speak a bit more about what we may be doing to try to address aspects of the spread of harmful information. Building such resilience is a long-term endeavor. Safeguarding the vulnerable from the effects of harmful information, we rely on constructive approaches and collaboration. And I'm looking here also at the colleagues in UNHCR, particularly today, as we pledge to collaborate further, at least for the next 2 years, over collaboration on capacity building, joint projects, research, and generation of information understanding of the spread of MDH. On one hand, to improve the access of timely and reliable information in times of need, but also on the other hand, to safeguard civilians from the spread and effects of misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, as well as hateful speech. So in this area, we invest, at the ICRC, we invest along with other humanitarian organizations. We need to develop adequate responses to harmful information that keep the protection of civilians, of people affected by conflict, at the center of these responses to harmful information. So in order for us to do so, this requires us to really understand harmful information and how it affects people, and how, by understanding that, we're able to potentially assist people to build their own self-protection and to improve their resilience. It requires us also to seek dialogues with parties to armed conflict, as well as dialogue with social media companies to help them better understand the impact and the limits of their responses, and to better implement policies in ways that respect people's safety and dignity and other fundamental rights. And I see Nick is telling me I've got a minute, I've got 20 seconds left. 30 seconds, fine. This also requires us to partner and collaborate across the humanitarian sector. Why? Because this is really a protection issue that requires protection actors operating in the same space to collaborate on the response. It's a 360-degree response. It's not a project of one organization. So that we have a relevant and adequate response, be it online or be it offline. And finally, to coordinate our responses to various types of harmful information rather than one solution across the board. With that, we again renew the pledge that we've made to the Global Refugee Forum this year, and we're confident that we'll be able to improve our preparedness, not only to respond, but hopefully to prevent the impact and the effects of harmful information, but potentially also other types of digital risks, and mitigate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Before I call on the next panelist, I want to go back slightly to Santiago, the Google. Maybe perhaps 2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't ask for it, but I'll take it. So I was talking about AI. So we believe that AI has tremendous potential to advance human rights, including in helping us make progress on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. But at the same time, we also understand that the responsible deployment of AI requires more than any one company's actions, and we will need multi-stakeholder approaches to ensure fairness and equity, especially for protected communities. So our approach is to innovate boldly and responsibly together. For example, we created a YouTube Gen AI and Fairness Advisory Panel with UNHCR and other organizations to provide subject matter expertise on product and policy development. AI is not new to Google. and we have a history of human rights due diligence. In 2018, we released our AI principles, 5 years ago, to ensure the development of new technologies is done in a way that is responsible, ethical, and rights respecting. Our AI principles commit that new technologies must be socially beneficial, that they avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias, that they be built and tested for safety, incorporating privacy by design principles, and be accountable to people and uphold high standards of scientific excellence. So in closing, Google was built on the premise that information can be a powerful thing for people around the world, and we work hard to create a better digital future for vulnerable populations, enabling access to information services and education while also protecting them from online risks. So we're committed to continued partnerships to amplify our collective efforts. Thank you.
Thank you once again. Hope that will include refugees. Yeah, thank you. Finally, I want to turn out to our final speaker. We are privileged to have here with us today Under Secretary General Special Advisor on Prevention of Genocide, Madam Alice Ntutu Wairimu. Madam Under Secretary, your office is responsible for UN strategy planning action on hate speech. Can you share your insights on the work being done by your office to implement the plan action on the hate speech in both offline and online contexts?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to first begin by thanking my colleagues, the High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Filippo Grandi, the Assistant Secretary General, Gillian Triggs, for convening this Global Refugee Forum, and also for extending the invitation for me to speak at this very important event, and for holding this very important discussion on hate speech, misinformation, and disinformation. So at all times in human history, the world has always faced identity conflicts, with roots often linked to hatred, tyranny, and the dehumanizing discourses that deny groups of people their dignity and rights. These identity conflicts have greatly contributed to the presence of refugees, as we know. So our prevention efforts are therefore sustained and continuous, focusing on strengthening capacity to prevent at the local, national, regional, and international levels. We pay attention to all drivers of conflict in society, the core of which is hate speech, and I'll explain why. Hate speech, as we know, happens both offline and online. Online hate speech now spreads at the speed of light, amplified by technology. In 2019, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched the UN Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, and he designated the office I lead as a UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide as the UN system-wide focal point on the implementation of this strategy. He did so because he recognized that hate speech has been and continues to be a risk factor for violence, and in its worst form for genocide and related atrocity crimes, by which I mean war crimes and crimes against humanity. And indeed, we know for a fact that no genocide has occurred without being preceded by, accompanied by, and followed by hate speech against the targeted group. So at the United Nations, we define hate speech as any kind of communication in speech, writing, or behavior that attacks or uses pejorative or discriminatory language with reference to a person or a group on the basis of who they are, based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, or other forms of identity. This is often rooted in and generates intolerance and hatred, and in certain contexts can be demeaning and divisive. So I must emphasize that this is not a legal definition. It is a definition that's meant to inform UN monitoring and programming on hate speech. So hate speech adversely affects the most vulnerable in our societies. We know that there have been attacks against ethnic, national, racial, and religious communities, which are the core protected groups under the 1948 Genocide Convention. that we celebrated the 75th anniversary. We commemorated just this last week on December 9th. This convention was the first human rights treaty adopted by the UN, and it pledged to uphold and reinvigorate efforts to prevent the crime of crimes, genocide and related atrocity crimes. So we do know that worldwide there are serious violations and abuses are committed against refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. They are targeted both offline and online with hate speech and other xenophobic or exclusionary ideologies. And of great concern to my mandate is their targeting, not only because of their displacement status, but also because of their identity. This happens everywhere, and it must be addressed. In conflict settings, hate speech has a greater impact as it threatens life-saving assistance to affected populations. Hate speech undermines peace and humanitarian operations. Hate speech justifies and triggers attacks and violence against civilians. And many people do not make the connection, but as I said, hate speech is integral for a genocide to happen. And history has unfortunately provided us with several examples of this, from the Holocaust during the World War II, to the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994, and the genocide in Srebrenica, Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1995, where hate speech and the dehumanization of others on the basis of identity were utilized to justify horrific violence. I mentioned those three because it's important to note that at that time, we did not have online hate speech, but we had offline hate speech, and that offline hate speech greatly contributed to those genocides. So today we continue to witness hate speech as an integral part of all identity-based armed conflicts around the world. So my office has been leading efforts in supporting UN country teams worldwide. We support them to draw up plans of action on hate speech, for which every UN agency looks at how hate speech manifests in the way that they will carry out their work, in the people that they are working with. And then we also support governments to develop national action plans on hate speech. And we've had a long-running conversation, probably the longest-running conversation with tech and social media companies has been with our office. And part of that conversation culminated in October 2021 with a brief from me to the Security Council on online hate speech and how it contributes to conflict. And I invited tech and social media companies to co-brief with me. And so we had Google, I remember, Facebook was there, then Facebook, we had Twitter, we had YouTube. So we need to continue finding these durable solutions to hate speech against refugees on action to address and counter hate. That's in line with international human rights, in particular the freedom of expression. So the conversation that we've been having with tech and social media companies that were held at the Chatham House Rules, this last year we decided to put together the recommendations into a policy document. It's available on our website. And we focused on moderation, curation, and regulation. We drafted this policy together. So we are pursuing vigorously people-centered approaches to protect vulnerable groups from serious violations and abuses. And we do know that hatred and hate speech, whether propagated online or offline, is a danger to everyone. Therefore, fighting it should be everyone's job. We also know that nobody can address hate speech alone, and partnerships and collaboration are essential. We require recognition of the contribution of hate speech to the identity conflicts that force people to leave their countries and seek refuge, concerted efforts at all levels of society and all relevant stakeholders. So tech companies have an important role to play, not only in terms of moderating harmful content, but also in ensuring their business profit models find solutions aimed at dealing with those who disseminate hate speech and also address the concerns of the victims. So to counter and address hate speech against vulnerable groups, including refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers, we are working with champions, influencers, and opinion shapers. And we've drawn them from many contexts. And to date, we have plans of action with women on countering and addressing hate speech. We have plans of action with sports leagues, the major sports leagues in the US, especially NFL, NBA, NASCAR, with the Liverpool Football Club. We have plans of action with the religious leaders and actors on countering hate speech. And so these several policy documents that are available on our website, and I encourage all of you to make use of them in your work. So I conclude by stressing the importance of digital literacy and education, through which we should have a clear understanding of what hate speech is, its impacts on society, and ways to address and counter it in line with international human rights standards, and indeed the ability to understand and act against hate speech is paramount to peaceful, inclusive, and just societies free from genocide and related atrocity crimes, by which I mean war crimes and crimes against humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Undersecretary General. Thank you to all panelists. Before that, before I open the floor, I just want Sahara to make one clarification she wanted to make. We can put on the Sahara speaks Arabic.
نعم، هناك شيء إضافي أريد أن إضافته على أو تصحيحه على ما قلته، وأن عندنا في المخيم في موريتانيا يمكن أن يكون هناك استقرار. نعم، هناك فعلا استقرار في مخيم من برا في موريتانيا من ناحية خطاب الكراهية، لكن هذا لا يعني أنه ليس موجود ويحدث مع أشخاص معينين من اللاجئين. هذا يعني أن خطاب الكراهية ليس شيء مثلا ليس شيء عام أو يحدث مع الجميع بطريقة مباشرة، لكنه يحدث مع أشخاص معينين. ما أريد أن أوضحه أن في موريتانيا فعلا يوجد استقرار من ناحية خطاب الكراهية. هذا ما أردت أن أضيفه بعد كلامي، لكن ما أقوله واضح أن خطاب الكراهية فعلا يحدث مع أشخاص معينين. نعم، شكرا.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to give to the floor now to Mauritania. I want to give to the floor to... Yeah, you can pick the microphones on the chairs, please.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. I will speak in the official language of Mauritania, which is Arabic, sorry. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. شكرا السيد الرئيس. محفوظ الإبراهيم، الأمين العام لوزارة الداخلية واللامركزية بموريتانيا. فقط أغتنم فرصة هذا الملتقى الدولي حول اللاجئين لأخبركم بالجهود الكبيرة التي تقوم بها موريتانيا رغم صعوبة الظروف ورغم الأوضاع في منطقة الساحل لاستضافة اللاجئين وإيوائهم، وما يطرح ذلك من تحديات على بلد مثل بلادنا السائر في طريق النمو. في الحقيقة ثقافتنا ثقافة استضافة وإكرام الضيف من أهم قيمنا، وحتى أنه في بلد عادة تكون الأمطار قليلة عندنا مثل يقول لبن الضيف، أن الضيف إذا أتى حتى في الصيف ولم يكن اللبن متوفر فإنه سيجد اللبن، وعندما يرجع يقول وجدت اللبن والأرض خريف مع أنها الصيف في الحقيقة. هذا خلفية ثقافية. فيما يتعلق بالتقنيات الجديدة وحماية الناس منها وحماية أعراضهم من التشهير ومحاربة المعلومات الكاذبة، فإن موريتانيا اعتمدت المقاربات والاستراتيجيات الدولية حسب أحسن المعايير المطبقة. عندنا مثلا قانون يجرم الكراهية ويجرم العنصرية، مهما كان مصدرها ومهما كان من تستهدف. عندنا قانون أيضا يحرم أو يتناول الجريمة السبرانية والمعلومات أيضا الكاذبة، وعندنا قوانين تحمي أعراض الناس وتحميهم من التشهير والقذف، وعندنا أيضا قانون لحماية المعلومات الشخصية، وعندنا مؤسسة مستقلة لحماية البيانات الشخصية، وعندنا هيئات تسهر أيضا على حماية أعراض الناس ومحاربة المعلومات الكاذبة، لأن عندنا سلطة عليا مستقلة للصحافة والسمعيات البصرية تسمى لاهابا، وعندنا أيضا آلية لحماية المهاجرين وحماية اللاجئين وحماية أيضا الناس من المتاجرة بالبشر، وهي أيضا آلية مستقلة تعمل أيضا في موريتانيا. الوضع في موريتانيا وصل إلى أنه في بعض الأحيان يكون مخيم اللاجئين أكبر من المدينة التي تؤويه من ناحية السكان، وأكبر من كثير من الولايات الوطنية. وعلى العموم القانون الموريتاني يتعامل مع المواطنين والمقيمين واللاجئين والمارين والوافدين والنازحين على قدم المساواة، لأن القانون يطبق على جميع المقيمين، وعندما يصلنا الضيف يتمتع بحصانة تلقائية، وحتى أنه بعض الأحيان يحصل على معاملة تفضيلية أحسن من تلك التي يستفيد منها المواطنين، وحتى أنه في بعض الأحيان تكون برامج موجهة للمواطنين وقروض استلمتها موريتانيا من ممولين يستفيد منها جميع من يقطن موريتانيا سواء كان لاجئا أو كان مواطنا. والحماية التي نوفرها حماية القانون نوفرها للمواطنين ونوفرها للاجئين والمقيمين بدون أي تمييز. واللاجئون في موريتانيا يتمتعون بكافة الحقوق، ويتمتعون أيضا بحرية التنقل، ويتمتعون خلافا لبعض الدول بالولوج إلى كافة الوظائف، وتلك هي حال الأجانب. جميع الوظائف في موريتانيا مفتوحة أمام الأجانب وأمام اللاجئين ما عدا الوظيفة العمومية، مع أن الوظيفة العمومية عندنا اتفاقيات مع بعض الدول تسمح لمواطني هذه الدول إذا وصلوا إلى موريتانيا أن يكونوا في الوظيفة العمومية. والآن التوجه أيضا طبقا لالتزاماتنا في 2019 والتزاماتنا في 2023 أن نزيد أيضا تدريجيا من الاندماج الاجتماعي للاجئين واندماجهم الاقتصادي، وكل هذا وأغلبه على موارد ذاتية لموريتانيا بما في ذلك الصحة والتعليم وبرامج الحماية الاجتماعية. ونحن بطبيعة الحال نعتبر اللاجئين كإخوة عندنا وكضيوف مبجلين، ونعتبر أن واجبنا أيضا هو العناية بهم، ونعتبر أنهم أيضا قيمة مضافية للمجتمع. والنقطة الأخيرة التي أريد أن أتكلم عنها أن هذه التقنيات الجديدة فعلا تفرض الكثير من التحديات، ولذا أقرنا برنامج الجريمة السبرانية، وعندنا مخابر أيضا تكنولوجيا عند الأجهزة المختصة، ولكن كما تعلمون التقنيات الجديدة تتطور بشكل أسرع من التنظيمات، ولذا تنظيمها صعب والسيطرة عليها صعب. وهناك دائما إشكالية بين الخلط بين حرية التعبير وحرية الصحافة والحفاظ أيضا على حقوق الناس ومحاربة التشهير ومحافظة على أعراض الناس وعلى معلوماتهم الشخصية. ونحن نبحث عن هذا التوازن، مع أنه دائما يكون توازن صعب الجمع بين هذين الهدفين، ولكننا نظام ديمقراطي ونظام مؤسسات ونظام حريات، ومع ذلك نحافظ أيضا على هذا ونحارب كل ما يمكن أن يمس السلم الاجتماعي أو الأمن أو الخطاب يروج للكراهية. ولذا حتى الآن ونحن نستضيف اللاجئين منذ عشرات السنين لم تحصل بلبلة اجتماعية لا في مخيمات اللاجئين ولا ما بين اللاجئين والسكان المستضيفين، ويتقاسمون كل شيء، يتقاسمون الماء، يتقاسمون المرعى، يتقاسمون في السراء والضراء، وهم في الحقيقة إخوة. وأظن أنها تجربة نموذجية يمكن أن تصنف من أحسن الممارسات في استضافة اللاجئين، رغم أننا بلد من العالم الثالث وبلد سائر في طريق النمو، ولكن الإرادة السياسية قوية وهي كفيلة بالتغلب على هذه الصعاب، مع أيضا مساهمة الشركاء من خلال هذا المنتدى والمنتديات الأخرى. أقترح أن يعمق النقاش في قضية التقنيات وقضية أيضا استخدام التقنيات الجديدة استخدامها الإيجابي، مع أننا في موريتانيا أخذنا مبادرات لحماية مثلا الأطفال والقُسطر من المحتويات يعني الضارة في هذه التقنيات الجديدة والشبكات التواصل الاجتماعي، ولكنه موضوع جدير بأن يناقش وأن تنظم فيه بحوث، ونحن في موريتانيا مستعدون للمساهمة في هذا العمل إذا شكل فريق عمل مختص بهذه الإشكالية حتى نحمي الجميع سواء كانوا مواطنين أو مقيمين أو لاجئين أو نازحين لهذا السبب أو لذلك. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you for the interest of time. I think now, dear ladies and gentlemen, when we are opening the mic now, but we should be mindful on the time, like, please. I will now open the floor for questions. No. For questions and to hear more Blage's announcement. I have invited the following speakers to speak. Please make your statement from the microphone at the of the front room. First, I would like to invite Mr. D.T. Moreau, a member of European Parliament, to speak. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Wonderful.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, as a member of the European Parliament, I feel honored to participate in this really very crucial discussion. The profound implications of online hate speech demand our urgent attention. The digital realm, once envisioned as a space for connectivity and enlightenment, has unfortunately become a breeding ground and a platform for right-wing narratives. Their hate speech has infiltrated the mainstream discourse, shaping public opinion and normalizing discriminatory practices. With the transition of hate speech into the digital sphere, it has become much easier to reach even more people. In the context of migration, this means fueling racist narratives that are increasingly dominating debates around the world. Discussing this critical issue, we must recognize that hate speech goes beyond explicit language. It manifests in the collective vilification of refugees, which goes hand in hand with discrimination and which becomes manifest against them in persecution and violence. To counter these toxic narratives, a heightened awareness is needed to recognize and actively combat racist discourse. We must therefore tackle the problem through media education. In addition, we must see the interdependence of hate speech with racist, sexist, anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist prejudice packaged as rational arguments but underpinned by emotional hatred. Studies consistently show that anti-refugee rhetoric correlates with real-world physical attacks. The consequences of online hate speech will spill our societies, causing tangible harm and perpetuating violence against vulnerable communities. With the Digital Service Act, the European Parliament has taken important steps here, in particular by holding the major platform companies accountable, without giving in to the illusion that this will put a stop to online hate. On the technical front, researchers are developing prototypes to detect cyber hate automatically and at scale. While these technological advancements are essential, that won't solve the problem. Let me make one last point very clear. Combating hate speech is a societal responsibility. The European Parliament is striving to have it recognized as a crime in EU legislation applicable on the whole EU territory. Beyond legislation, each one of us has a role to play in countering online narratives. whether through thoughtful comments, reporting harmful content, or engaging in constructive discussions. By raising awareness, working together, and advocating for policies that prioritize the protection of vulnerable communities, we can work together towards a more inclusive and compassionate digital future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The next person I want to give the mic is Mega Omi from UNESCO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and distinguished panelists, for a very thoughtful discussion. My name is Megumi, and I'm representing UNESCO. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to announce UNESCO's contribution to this very important multi-stakeholder pledge. UNESCO has the mandate to safeguard the rights to freedom of expression and access to information while addressing the threats to information integrity. In this regard, UNESCO has been supporting media institutions and their digital platforms, most recently as part of the Regional Refugee Response Plan to the Ukraine situation. The actions work to create or reinforce online content and online news designed for and with refugees, without bias, based on facts, and aligned with ethical principles. The results have contributed to stronger fact-based information exchange in situations where affected populations are grappling with identifying trustworthy, reliable, and objective information amid the prevalence of mis- and disinformation in current digital information ecosystem. I think this very much aligns with what we've heard from the panel today, that one of the most effective means of fighting mis- and disinformation is really increasing access to reliable information. In this regard, UNESCO pledges to expand such projects on enhancing media's capacity to become a trusted source of information, thus countering mis- and disinformation, particularly in 8 countries in Latin America and Africa. Moreover, you may know that UNESCO has launched its guidelines for the governance of digital platforms in November this year, calling on digital platforms to conduct human rights due diligence regularly. UNESCO will develop specific risk management guides to address risks associated to digital environment and engagement of forcibly displaced population in close collaboration with UNHCR and other entities. Also, UNESCO is committed to increasing the capacities of organizations working with refugees on the monitoring and curbing of online harmful content, also supporting the protection of displaced or exiled journalists who are particularly facing digital threats, and also providing technical expertise on research related to election cycles and spikes of disinformation and hate speech. We very much look forward to working with everyone in this room. Our full pledge is available on the online database, and if you would like to learn more or collaborate, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I now call on the Executive Director of KEDEC Network, Helen Ney.
Thank you, Chair. Helen McElhinney. No one gets that right.
Thank you. At least it's not only me.
It's definitely not only you. Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you all for a very important and timely discussion on something that's very dear to the CDAC network's heart. We have been committed to securing safe and trustworthy information environments since our creation 14 years ago. We are particularly newly concerned about the impact of generative AI on the discourse, the extent of which I think we're yet to see. And we're particularly concerned about how this will impact people's access to the life-saving information and communication tools that they need at the point of greatest need. Our membership, which includes many journalists and media development agencies, UN agencies, NGOs, and the Red Cross, are pleased to pledge to work on this agenda continually this year, particularly on the generative AI impact, to convene our members in learning events and coordinate at the operational level through our communities of practice. We particularly appreciate the voices of the refugees who shared their personal experiences today, and we're particularly interested in those voices continuing to shape the regulatory environment. Thank you.
Next, Osnawak from International Rescue Committee.
Thank you, Abdullahi. Huzan Wakar, speaking on behalf of IRC. Thank you so much for the meaningful conversation and highlighting the consequences of hate speech and very nicely pointing out the connection between hate speech and genocide that we've seen not just in recent times but also throughout history. IRC is pledging to take initiative to prevent disinformation and misinformation and hate speech by sharing authentic and timely information using digital platforms and its outreach activities to counter xenophobia and hate speech that impacts the refugee communities that we serve. We will also be enhancing and improving access to information by spreading out our signpost initiative in the Rohingya communities that we work. This is part of our broader pledge on facilitating economic inclusion, health protection, resettlement, and resilience for the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, and we may not have more time for questions from the preliminaries. Thank you. First, I would like to thank all the panelists. Thank you for your pledges, your insights, your ideas and support. That is much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who has made the pledges. Your commitments are far-reached and trans-informative. They give a concrete action to implement and build on. Thank you to everyone attending this event, both in person and watching live around the world, for your questions and comments, which enrich today's discussion. In conclusion, important to have this issue of the digital protection on the agenda at the Global Refugee Forum. It is timely opportunity to make sure humanitarian and displaced are included in our broader international efforts. The pledges and the event raises the feasibility, momentum to find a solution to digital protection challenges in line with the ambitions of the Global Compact for Refugees. Partnerships are key to develop. Partnerships are key in developing sustainable response, ultimately protecting communities from digital risk. We all have a part to play. Thank you. Thank you all.